We do not live in an age that lacks intelligence. We live in an age where intelligence is drowned out by noise. Not because people have lost the ability to think deeply, but because deep thinking is no longer rewarded. This world has learned to applaud those who speak fast, speak loud, speak with certainty, even when they are empty inside. And the most frightening thing is, we have grown used to it. So used to it that we no longer realize we are standing in a society that worships confidence instead of understanding, worships image instead of essence, worships instant emotion instead of lasting truth. There was a time when people believed that wisdom had to be sharpened through doubt, through questions, through the courage to admit, "I do not know." But that time seems far away. Today, people are not taught how to think. They are taught how to react. They are not encouraged to understand deeply. They are encouraged to have an opinion as fast as possible. Silence is seen as weakness. Hesitation is seen as ignorance. Certainty, even when wrong, is seen as strength. And in this strange reversal, society begins to hand power to those who do not seek truth, but only know how to attract attention. If you pause for a moment and look around, you will see that this needs no proof. The most celebrated faces are rarely the ones who ask difficult questions. They are the ones who bring comfort, stimulation, or outrage. They make you laugh, get angry, agree, or hate, but rarely make you think for more than a few minutes. We call them by many different names, but their nature is the same. People who know how to capture attention, and attention, in this age, has become the new measure of value. It is in this context that Socrates appears. Not as a distant historical figure, but as a mirror reflecting directly into the present. He lived thousands of years ago. Yet what he saw while walking the streets of Athens is frighteningly similar to what unfolds on today's endless scrolling feeds. Socrates wrote no books, built no doctrine for others to worship. He only asked questions. Questions that seemed simple, yet were powerful enough to shake the foundations of false confidence. And for that reason, he was seen as dangerous. He once said that the most dangerous person is not the ignorant one, but the ignorant one who believes he is intelligent. When a person believes they already know enough, they stop listening. When they stop listening, wisdom begins to die. Socrates called this the sleep of reason, but if in his time only part of society fell into that sleep, today an entire civilization seems to be sleeping in the applause of its own voice. We are proud to live in the age of information. Everything is within reach. With a single touch, you can know almost anything. But knowing is not the same as understanding. There is a vast difference between possessing information and digesting it into wisdom. And it is in that gap that modern society begins to slide. We collect facts the way we store possessions, but rarely ask what truly matters. Instead of digging deeper, we skim. Instead of reflecting, we react. The mind becomes a crowded room of constant movement, yet no one stays long enough to truly understand. Socrates once walked barefoot through the marketplace of Athens, among merchants, politicians, scholars, and asked them about justice, about virtue, about the good life. He didn't do this to appear smarter than others. He did it to reveal a painful truth. Many people speak about great ideas without ever truly thinking about them. Today, if Socrates appeared on a social media platform, he would likely be ignored after a few seconds. Not because he had nothing important to say, but because he did not speak in a way that was easy to consume. We have grown used to measuring a person's value by their level of visibility. How many followers, how many likes, how many times their name is mentioned. And slowly, a silent belief forms in the collective mind. If many people are looking at you, you must have value. But Socrates would ask in return, does what is seen the most also deserve to be heard? Or are we simply giving power to those who know how to strike the instincts of the crowd? Here, the problem does not lie only with those who are celebrated. It lies with us, because no one becomes an idol without worshippers. We are drawn to simplicity, to neat answers, to strong but short-lived emotions. Complexity exhausts us, ambiguity unsettles us, and so we choose those who offer certainty, even when that certainty is built on sand. Socrates called this the illusion of knowledge, and he believed it was the most dangerous disease of a society. Perhaps the most frightening thing is not that society has changed, but that we have adapted to that change without questioning it. We have grown so accustomed to noise that silence feels uncomfortable, so accustomed to being guided that thinking for ourselves feels heavy. And within that familiarity, something deeply human is slowly disappearing. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet retreat of wisdom. Socrates said that a life unexamined is not worth living. Yet modern society is built precisely to prevent that examination. Through speed, through entertainment, through constant distraction. And perhaps the most important question is not where society went wrong, but whether we dare to stop long enough to see it. Because the moment you begin to notice the noise is also the moment you stand at the threshold of a different awakening. Socrates did not come to destroy the old world. He only shone a light into corners people deliberately refused to look at. And it was that light that made many uncomfortable. Because when the light appears, what we believed was solid suddenly reveals cracks. Beliefs repeated for too long suddenly become fragile. People once seen as wise suddenly discover that they have only been repeating ideas they never truly understood themselves. Socrates called that moment the beginning of wisdom, but for many, it felt like humiliation. In his time, Athens saw itself as the center of civilization. People believed they were advanced, democratic, enlightened. But Socrates saw something different. He saw people who spoke endlessly about virtue but did not live by it, who spoke constantly about justice but could not define what justice was, who spoke of truth as if they owned it, while never questioning where their beliefs came from. And he understood that the decline of a society does not begin with poverty or war, but begins at the moment people stop doubting themselves. Today, that complacency has not disappeared. It is encouraged. We are taught that we must have clear positions, must assert ourselves, must express opinions at all times. But we are rarely taught how to build those opinions from genuine understanding. Opinions become a kind of mental accessory, used to display identity, rather than a tool to search for truth. And so, many people speak with absolute certainty about things they only heard yesterday. Socrates called this phenomenon the illusion of knowledge. It is more dangerous than simple ignorance, because an ignorant person who knows they lack understanding can still learn. But a person who believes they already know enough has no reason to listen. In modern society, this illusion is fed every day. Every like is a confirmation, every share is applause. And slowly, the human mind learns to seek agreement instead of truth. Socrates once confronted the sophists, those considered the intellectuals of his time. They were skilled speakers, skilled persuaders, skilled at making others believe they were intelligent. But what they sold was not wisdom. It was the feeling of being right. They taught how to win arguments, not how to understand an issue. They taught how to impress, not how to live rightly. And Socrates clearly saw that when words are separated from truth, society begins to slide toward a dangerous direction. If you look closely, you will see that the sophists never truly left. They only changed form. Today, they appear under many different names. They know how to package messages so they are easy to swallow. They know how to strike collective emotions. They understand that people prefer simple answers over complex questions. And when a society begins to give power to those who manipulate emotions better than those who dare to speak truth, decline is no longer a possibility. It becomes inevitable. What is sad is that many of us are not forced to follow that current. We choose it willingly, because deep thinking requires effort. It requires slowing down in a world that worships speed. It requires accepting that some questions do not have comfortable answers. And so, we choose the easier path. We choose to listen to those who make us feel right, rather than those who make us question ourselves. Socrates believed that wisdom cannot be separated from humility. His famous statement, "I know that I know nothing," was not self-depreciation. It was freedom. Because when you admit your limits, you open the door to learning. But in modern society, intellectual humility is mistaken for incompetence. People believe they must always appear certain, must always have answers, must always take a side. And so, very few dare to say, "I do not yet understand this." We live in a sea of opinions, yet lack real dialogue. Everyone speaks, but few listen. Everyone asserts, but rarely questions. And in that noise, Socrates reminds us that the purpose of thinking is not to win, but to understand, not to overpower others, but to illuminate ourselves. Yet that message, in a world that measures value by attention, feels out of place. Perhaps if Socrates were alive today, he would not stand on a stage, not debate on television, not try to capture attention. He would still walk among the crowd, ask simple questions, and let others confront the emptiness or depth within themselves. And for that reason, he would still be seen as a troublemaker, because nothing makes people more uncomfortable than being forced to think. The decline of wisdom does not happen overnight. It happens slowly, through countless small choices, through choosing feeling over truth, through choosing noise over silence. And when society grows accustomed to not thinking, the one who asks questions becomes a stranger. Yet within that strangeness, another path quietly opens, one that demands more courage but is also far more truthful. There is a strange moment in modern life when people realize they know many things, yet are not sure they truly understand anything. We are surrounded by data, numbers, opinions, ready-made explanations for every problem, but the more we are exposed, the more tired the mind becomes, the more confused it feels. Socrates once said that knowledge does not lie in how much you accumulate, but in your ability to distinguish what is real and what is only an illusion. And perhaps what makes this society fragile is not a lack of knowledge, but the loss of the ability to listen to oneself amid the storm of information. Today, thinking is no longer a private act, it has become a performance. People think in order to be seen and to be agreed with, to stand on the right side. But Socrates would ask, right for whom, and for what reason? When thinking is placed on a stage, it begins to serve the ego instead of truth. And from there, many people stop seeking understanding and start seeking the safety of standing within a crowd that shares the same belief. That is when wisdom retreats, giving way to comfort. Socrates believed that real thinking is always uncomfortable at first, because it forces people to face uncertainty, inner contradictions, the feeling that they may have lived wrongly or understood wrongly for a long time. No one enjoys that feeling, and so society slowly forms an unspoken agreement. We will not dig deeper if it requires us to change. Instead, we consume ideas that are easy to swallow, sentences that sound intelligent, messages that make us feel we are on the good side without any further effort. In ancient Athens, the sophists made their living by teaching people how to win arguments. It did not matter what was right, only how to speak so others would believe. Socrates saw danger in this, because when words are separated from truth, society begins to honor form over substance. Today, this is no longer a separate profession. It has become a common skill, knowing how to speak attractively, how to stir emotion, how to hold attention. Sometimes matters more than what you are actually saying. We have learned to react before we understand. A shocking headline can ignite outrage in millions within minutes. A shortened quote can destroy someone's reputation overnight. And rarely do we stop to ask, is this true, or is it designed to provoke? Socrates would not take sides in that storm. He would stand outside it and ask why people are so easily swept away. And perhaps the answer lies in the fear of being alone with one's own thoughts. Silence was once the place where wisdom was born. But silence today feels uncomfortable. It forces us to face unanswered questions, inner emptiness, the feeling that we do not fully know who we are. And so, we fill it with sound, with images, with the constant presence of others. Not because we want connection, but because we fear confrontation. Socrates understood this fear deeply. He knew that people would do anything to avoid looking directly at their own soul. Yet he also believed that only by daring to look does a person begin to live truthfully. Not living according to social expectations, but living according to one's essence. Wisdom, for Socrates, is not something that makes you superior to others. It is something that makes you deceive yourself less. And that does not bring excitement. It brings quiet. A quiet very different from emptiness. It is the quiet of someone who no longer needs to prove they know everything. You may have felt this before, even if only briefly. A moment when you realized you were not certain about something. And instead of panic, you felt lighter. Lighter because you no longer had to defend an intellectual image. Lighter because you were allowed to learn again from the beginning. If you have ever had such a moment, perhaps you touched what Socrates called the starting point of wisdom. And if this feeling is beginning to stir as you hear these lines, do not rush to extinguish it. Let it stay a little longer. In this world, many people speak, but few truly listen. And sometimes, simply knowing that others are also questioning, also doubting, also searching in their own quiet way is a great comfort. If within you arises the desire to share a thought, or simply to leave a trace that you were here, that you listened, that you reflected, that is completely natural. True dialogues often begin like that, not loudly, not forcefully, just people realizing they are not alone in asking questions. Socrates never wanted disciples. He did not build communities around shared beliefs. He only created space for people to examine themselves. And perhaps, in a society so accustomed to being guided, daring to ask what you think, what you believe, and why you believe it, is already a powerful act. No need to declare, no need to prove. Just be honest with yourself. Because from that honesty, something else begins to form. A small distance between you and the surrounding noise, an ability to pause before reacting, a curiosity that replaces outrage, and within that small space, wisdom has a chance to breathe. Socrates believed that society does not collapse from a lack of intelligent people, but from a lack of individuals willing to keep the flame of their thinking from being extinguished. When a person begins to do that, they no longer fully belong to the crowd, not because they are above it, but because they are more awake, and that wakefulness, though fragile, is enough to create a counterforce to the spreading shallowness. But to understand this more clearly, we must look deeper into how society has gradually replaced wisdom with entertainment, and why attention has become the most powerful currency of this age. Socrates once believed that a society can only stand firm when people place truth above comfort, but modern society moves in the opposite direction, gently, gradually, so slowly that few notice what is being left behind. There is no clear moment of collapse, only a silent shift of values. From seeking meaning, we move to seeking sensation. From thinking, we move to entertainment. And little by little, wisdom becomes something heavy, while distraction takes on the appearance of freedom. Entertainment is not evil. Socrates also understood that humans need joy, but he warned that when entertainment becomes the center of inner life, it begins to replace fundamental questions about how to live rightly. When every moment must be filled with stimulation, people no longer have time to face themselves, and in that emptiness, attention becomes the most valuable commodity. Whoever controls the attention of the crowd holds power, no matter what they say. In ancient Athens, the public square was a place of debate. People gathered there to listen, to challenge, to test ideas. But today, that square has transformed. It is no longer where people meet to discover what is right, but where opinions compete to be seen. Deep ideas that require time to understand often lose to simple, shocking, easily shared messages. Not because they are more true, but because they better fit the rhythm of a world that is always in a hurry. Plato, the student of Socrates, once warned that democracy can only survive if citizens are nurtured by reason and virtue. Without that, the crowd will choose those who make them feel comfortable, not those who force them to think. Hearing this today, it is hard not to feel its familiarity. Public discourse becomes a stage. Truth and popularity run the same race, but they do not play by the same rules, and very often, truth finishes last. The problem does not lie in technology. Socrates would not blame the tools. He always looked at human psychology. Technology only amplifies what already exists within us. The desire for recognition, the fear of being left behind, the need to belong to a group. Every like, every share, every emotional reaction reinforces these drives. And over time, the mind learns to seek validation instead of understanding. We become highly sensitive to what others think of us, while growing increasingly distant from what we truly think ourselves. Socrates would ask, "When are you thinking? And when are you merely repeating?" Because many things we call personal opinions are actually echoes of collective voices. We consume ideas like fast food, quick, abundant, and low in nourishment. The mind, like the body, cannot remain healthy if it lives only on empty stimulation. When wisdom is starved, the ability to distinguish between truth and falsehood slowly weakens. In Athens, Socrates walked barefoot, asking questions that seemed naive. What is justice? What is virtue? What is a good life? He did not ask to elevate philosophy, but to return people to the essence of being human, knowing who you are, knowing what you live for. But imagine him walking through today's world, amid endless streams of information, amid layers of opinions. Would anyone stop long enough to listen to a question that offers no instant entertainment? The decline of wisdom does not happen because people are less intelligent. It happens because attention is fragmented. The mind is pulled too fast, in too many directions, until it can no longer stay with one question long enough. And when it can no longer stay, it loses the ability to go deep. Shallowness is not a conscious choice, but the result of an environment that constantly pulls us away from ourselves. Socrates believed that wisdom requires space, the space of silence, of slowness, of genuine dialogue. But modern society treats these things as a waste of time. We measure efficiency by speed, by productivity, by visibility, and so, what cannot be measured, such as deep understanding, inner maturity, is gradually pushed aside, not because it lacks value, but because it does not generate immediate attention. There is a paradox here. We are more connected than ever, yet we rarely meet one another at a truly human level. Each person speaks into the void, waiting for a response, rather than listening. And in that noise, a quiet question echoes, though few want to hear it. Are we living to understand or merely to be seen? Socrates would not answer that question for us. He would leave it hanging long enough to feel uncomfortable, because that discomfort is the sign that wisdom has not completely disappeared. Because if we can still feel uneasy in the face of shallowness, it means we still have the ability to recognize it, and from that ability, another choice begins to take shape, not loud, not visible, but strong enough to change the direction of a life. However, to understand why society so easily abandons wisdom, we must look deeper into how power operates in the shadows of distraction. Power rarely appears with a violent face. It often arrives very gently, very reasonably, even carrying the shape of convenience. Socrates understood this very early. He knew that to control people, there is no need for violence. It is enough to keep them distracted. A mind busy with noise no longer has the energy to ask questions, and a society that does not ask questions is easier to guide than any other society. In ancient Athens, the sophists made a living by teaching others how to persuade, not how to understand. They turned speech into a tool of power. Whoever spoke better won, regardless of whether it was true. Socrates saw the deep danger in this. When the ability to manipulate is honored more than the ability to seek truth, morality begins to become relative. And when morality becomes relative, everything can be justified, as long as it is done skillfully. Today, that lesson is not outdated at all. We no longer pay to study rhetoric as in the time of the sophists, but we live in an attention economy where everything is designed to keep your eyes staying as long as possible. Not to help you understand more, but to make you watch more. Whoever controls what you see influences what you think. Socrates did not need algorithms to understand this. He only needed to observe human nature. People like simple stories. They like having someone right and someone wrong. They like the feeling of standing on the side of justice and systems of power. In any era, learn how to nurture those needs. They do not force. They indulge. They give you the feeling of choice. While the frame of choices has already been drawn, you believe you are free, but in reality you are only moving within a carefully designed maze. Socrates would ask a very uncomfortable question. If you do not control your own thinking, are you truly free? Freedom, according to him, does not begin with what you are allowed to do, but with understanding why you want to do it. But modern society teaches the opposite. It teaches that freedom is having many choices, many opinions to follow, many models to imitate, and so people become busy choosing, with no time left to understand. There is a metaphor that Socrates loved, about the chariot of the soul. The charioteer is reason. The two horses pulling the chariot are desire and emotion. When reason is awake, the chariot moves in the right direction. But when reason is tired or falls asleep, the horses pull the chariot wherever they want. Looking at society today, it is hard not to see that image. Speed, pleasure, immediacy pull us endlessly. And reason, if it is still there, often only runs behind to justify what has already happened. We react before we think. We share before we understand. We become outraged before we ask questions. And each time we do so, we hand over a little more control of our minds to external forces. No one takes it from us. We give it away voluntarily in exchange for a sense of belonging, a sense of being right, a sense of safety in the crowd. Socrates called this spiritual slavery, even though outwardly people still appear free. Such a society does not need to suppress thought. It only needs to make thought exhausted. When people are too tired to think, they will accept ready-made answers. And those answers often come from those who benefit from keeping everything simple. Complexity threatens power. Doubt shakes order, while certainty, even false certainty, brings a feeling of stability. Socrates did not oppose power. He opposed blindness. He believed that power only becomes dangerous when people lose the ability to see through it. And that ability exists only when people maintain an honest relationship with themselves. But modern society does the opposite. It pulls us out of our inner world, directing attention outward, where everything is loud, fast, and full of stimulation. The inner world becomes a place few want to stay. The irony is that the more distracted people become, the emptier they feel. And to fill that emptiness, they seek even more stimulation. A closed loop forms, where lack of understanding feeds the need for entertainment, and entertainment weakens the capacity to understand. In that loop, wisdom does not die immediately. It is simply starved slowly, until it no longer has the strength to speak. Socrates believed that the most dangerous person to such a system is not the loud rebel, but the quiet thinker. That person is not easily provoked, not easily manipulated, not easily pulled by collective emotion, and because of that, they become difficult to control. That is why people like Socrates are always seen as a threat, not because they hold power, but because they do not easily hand over the power of their mind to anyone. But the important question is not how this system operates. The question is what each individual will do upon realizing it. Socrates did not believe in changing society through commands or force. He believed in awakening one person at a time, and that awakening begins very simply, from recognizing when you are being pulled along, when you are reacting instead of thinking, when you are seeking validation instead of truth. The moment you realize this, a small distance appears between you and the noisy world around you. That distance does not isolate you, but it makes you clearer. And in that clarity, you begin to see why a society can become very intelligent technically, yet remain poor in wisdom. However, to fully understand the cost of that poverty, we must look at the fate of Socrates himself and what his death says about the future of every civilization. The death of Socrates was not a historical accident, but the natural result of a society that had drifted too far from itself. When he was brought before the court of Athens, he was accused of corrupting the youth and offending the gods. But if you listen carefully, those were not the real charges. The real crime of Socrates was that he made people uncomfortable. He forced them to realize that the beliefs they had long relied on might not be as solid as they assumed. And for a society accustomed to living inside false certainty, that was unacceptable. Socrates could have saved himself. He could have flattered the court, apologized, promised to remain silent, but he refused, not out of arrogance, but because he understood that a life extended through betrayal of thought was worse than death. He said it was better to die speaking in his own voice than to live repeating the words of others. In that moment, Socrates was not only defending personal honor, he left a message for every generation that followed. Wisdom cannot survive in cowardice. His death reveals a cold rule of history. When a society begins to celebrate those who distract and eliminate those who question, decline has already been planted, not immediately, not with a loud collapse, but through the slow decay of thought. Athens continued to exist afterward, continued to build, continued to speak of democracy, but something had been lost. A society can function for a very long time after its soul has already cracked. Looking at the present, it is hard not to see the resemblance. We do not execute questioners with poison. We do something more refined. We ignore them, mock them, label them so we do not have to listen. The deep thinker is seen as negative. The doubter is seen as troublesome. The silent one is seen as having no voice. Meanwhile, those who know how to attract attention are given the stage, are listened to, are treated as authorities. Socrates would not be surprised by this. He understood crowd psychology. He knew that most people do not hate truth itself. They hate the feeling truth brings when it threatens familiar beliefs. So they choose entertainment over reflection, noise over dialogue, ready-made answers over open questions, not because they are evil, but because they are afraid. Afraid to look back at themselves, afraid to admit they may have been living inside an illusion. Yet Socrates was never hopeless about humanity. He believed that even in a declining society, wisdom can survive within individuals, not by fighting the crowd, but by refusing to let the mind dissolve into it. He didn't call for an external revolution. He called for a quiet internal one, a loyalty to conscience, even when it makes you feel alone. There is a deep paradox here. Those who live by reason are often seen as isolated, yet they are the ones who are truly free, not because they stand outside society, but because they do not allow society to fully dictate how they think. Meanwhile, those who merge into the crowd may feel safe, but the price is mental dependence. Socrates saw that price, and he chose to pay a different one, heavier on the body, but lighter on the soul. We often believe that the decline of a society comes from the outside, from enemies, from economic crisis or war. But Socrates reveals a more uncomfortable truth. Decline begins from within, when people lose the courage to think independently, when they hand over their power of judgment to louder, more confident, yet emptier voices, and when that happens long enough, society may continue to exist in form, but it becomes hollow in meaning. Yet within that very darkness, another possibility appears. When everything becomes too noisy, those who long for truth begin to seek silence. When falseness becomes widespread, sincerity becomes rare, and rare things carry their own gravity. Socrates believed that wisdom never disappears from the world. It only retreats into minds willing to receive it. If the death of Socrates is a warning to society, it is also an invitation to each individual, an invitation to slow down, to think more carefully, and to be more courageous with one's own truth. There is no need to become a philosopher, no need to argue or persuade anyone, only do not betray your own capacity to think. And from that honesty, something very different begins to form, not loud, but enduring. In the end, Socrates did not care how he would be remembered. He cared whether human beings could still live awake. And that question, after thousands of years, still hangs in the air, not directed outward, but aimed directly at each person listening. To answer it fully, one more step is needed, stepping beyond the fear of judgment and touching the inner freedom that Socrates believed was the ultimate purpose of life. The freedom that Socrates spoke of was never something visible from the outside. It does not lie in what you're allowed to say, what you're allowed to choose, or which side you stand on. It lies in the moment you are no longer pulled by the surrounding noise, when you no longer need to prove that you are right, when you no longer live to be recognized, but live to understand more clearly what is happening inside you. It is a very quiet, very ordinary state, yet so rare that many people pass through an entire lifetime without ever touching it. Socrates believed that people suffer not because they lack freedom, but because they do not realize they are imprisoning themselves. We fear being judged, fear being excluded, fear being seen as an outsider, and because of that fear that we bend our thinking to fit the crowd. We say what is safe, we believe what is popular, we react in expected ways. Gradually, we can no longer tell which voice is our own and which is only the echo of the world. But Socrates would say that the moment you notice this, the prison has already begun to crack. Inner freedom does not come from fighting society, but from not allowing society to completely determine how you think and feel. You still live among others, still work, still love, still make mistakes, but there is a small distance, very thin, between you and external judgments. That distance is enough for you to breathe, enough for you not to react immediately, enough for you to ask yourself a very simple question: is this true for me? And as long as that question exists, you are no longer completely swept away. Socrates called this living awake, not a state where you are always wise or always right, but a state where you do not abandon yourself. You allow yourself not to know. You allow yourself to change. You allow yourself to stand alone in your thinking if needed. And strangely, when you no longer try to dissolve into the crowd, you begin to feel more deeply connected to people. Not because you are more similar to them, but because you are more honest. Modern society teaches people to believe that value lies in visibility. How many people know you? How many agree with you? How many follow you? But Socrates would ask, when all those eyes disappear, What remains? If the answer is emptiness, then no external success can bring peace. On the other hand, if within you there is clarity, an ability to dialogue with yourself, then even in silence, you are not lost. A very gentle rebirth happens when a person stops seeking permission from the outside. Not loudly, not with declarations. You simply begin to live a little slower, listen a little more carefully, react a little less. You do not need to win every conversation. You do not need to have an opinion on everything. You do not need to prove that you understand life. And in that letting go, a sense of peace slowly appears, not because life becomes less complex, but because you no longer resist yourself. Socrates believed that true wisdom does not make people arrogant, but makes them humble. Not the kind of humility that seeks praise, but humility born from seeing one's own limits. When you know that you do not know everything, you are no longer afraid of being wrong. When you are not afraid of being wrong, you no longer need to hide. And when you no longer hide, you begin to live more lightly. Light not because external burdens disappear, but because you no longer carry heavy mental masks. In that state, the judgments of others gradually lose their weight, not because you look down on them, but because you no longer need them to confirm your existence. You understand that each person lives in their own inner world, with fears, illusions, and silent battles, and you no longer want to defeat them. You only want to live in alignment with the most truthful part of yourself. Socrates called this the excellence of the soul, when thinking, speech, and action no longer contradict one another. The peace that Socrates spoke of is not escaping the world, but standing firmly within it without being carried away. You still hear the noise, but it does not consume you. You still see the shallowness, but it does not make you bitter. You still face injustice, but you do not lose yourself in outrage. You understand that the deepest change does not begin with fixing others, but with no longer deceiving yourself. And there, a very different kind of freedom appears. Not exciting, not dramatic, but lasting. The freedom of one who no longer lives for applause. The freedom of one who dares to be alone with their own thoughts without fear. The freedom of one who understands that wisdom is not a weapon for winning, but a light for finding the way. That light does not make you stand out in the crowd, but it keeps you from getting lost in the dark. Socrates did not promise that this path would be easy. He only promised that it would be real. And in a world where so many things are designed to distract, truth becomes the most courageous act. The courage to stop, the courage to ask, the courage to admit that you do not yet understand. But it is precisely this courage that opens another kind of life, where you are no longer pulled by changing standards, but anchored in your own clarity. In the end, perhaps what Socrates wanted to remind us was not to become smarter, but to become more awake. Awake enough to notice when you are living for others, awake enough to notice when you are chasing voices that are not your own, and awake enough to choose to return, very slowly, very quietly, to the one place that cannot be manipulated if you are honest enough, your own mind. Because when you no longer need the world's permission to think, you are free.
Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this story. If this message touched your heart, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you'll never miss the next journey we take together. Your support means the world to me.